You might wonder why today we suddenly start reading from St. John's Gospel. Of the 4 Gospels, the shortest is Mark's. It is so short that it is not long enough to cover all the 34 Sundays of the ordinary time of Year B. That is why from the 17th to the 21st Sunday of ordinary time in Year B, the liturgy interrupts the Gospel of Mark and proposes the 6th chapter of the Gospel of St. John, whose theme is Jesus, our bread of life. In the desert, the people are hungry. Jesus asks Philip, "Where can we buy some bread for these people to eat?" That is only normal. Jesus had compassion on the crowds. But Philip is so surprised at this demand. The master is crazy, being so unrealistic, thinking of feeding such a large crowd. Let them go back to their villages and manage themselves. That should not be our problem. So Philip answers, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get even a little. 1 denarius was the daily wage of a laborer. So 200 denarii were more or less the equivalent of 6 months' wages. Why does Jesus provoke the apostles today? To put them to the test, says the Gospel. No doubt, the test was to see if they had learned to share in his concern for the people, if they had let themselves be formed in his presence. In today's passage, we meet especially Philip and Andrew. If it is to Philip that Jesus poses the problem, it is perhaps because, coming from the region around the lake, Philip would surely know where to buy bread. Philip was also somebody easily approachable. When the Greeks wanted to see Jesus, it is to Philip that they presented their request. Philip then told Andrew, and both of them took the demand of the Greeks to Jesus. The Gospels present Andrew as someone who loved to introduce people to Jesus. It looks like he was a sort of public relations man among the 12. It was he who had brought his brother Peter to Jesus. Today, we see him introducing this young boy who has brought a small parcel of barley bread and fish. Barley bread was considered to be the bread of the poor. In the early church, barley bread was used for the Eucharist. The fish that went with the bread was the salted and preserved fish that people used for travels and picnics. It is said that the Galilean pickled fish was famous all over the Roman Empire. Jesus himself knew what he was going to do, says the Gospel. But he teases Philip, who falls heavily into the trap, by referring to the amount of money required. He says that 200 denarii, 200 days' salary, would not be enough to feed such a large crowd. Has Philip already forgotten what had happened at the time of the prophets Elijah and Elisha? Has he forgotten the episodes of the manna and of the quails in the desert? Has he forgotten that the time of God is a time of abundance? they shall eat and still have left over, says today's first reading. Has he also forgotten what had happened when they lacked wine at Cana in Galilee? The souvenir of two great events where the people were fed miraculously is well preserved in the biblical tradition. These are Moses giving the manna and the quails in the desert, and the prophets Elijah and Elisha feeding the hungry in times of famine, which was today's first reading from 2 Kings. The Gospel passage of the multiplication of bread associates Jesus with these prophetic figures. John ends this passage by saying that Jesus is the prophet who is to come. Then we see Andrew introducing this small boy who has in his hands a small lunch pack. It could have been his own gift to Jesus, or his mother could have sent it for the master. This boy is a role model for others in the crowd. There is a young boy here who is offering 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, says Andrew. But what is that between so many? Jesus then makes a few gestures that are well known to us. He makes the people sit down on the grass. He receives from the hands of the boy the bread and the fish. He invokes the Father and says the blessing. He breaks the bread and hands it over to his disciples. And the disciples distribute bread that never ends. That which came from the boy and went through the hands of Jesus is inexhaustible. Imagine, first of all, how astounded the boy must have been. Everyone has enough to eat. 5,000 men, says St. John. And there remain 12 baskets full, 12 like the 12 tribes of Israel, like the 12 apostles, the 12 pillars of the church. Each apostle gets 1 basketful of abundance to share with those who are absent and those who will come later. The first reading says that they shall eat and have some left over. In the Gospel, these 12 basketfuls that the apostles gather up symbolize the abundance of the Messianic times. There will be enough for everybody, and there will even be enough left over for those who are absent. And now, the people's wonder turns into a certain kind of crowd behavior. The people want to take Jesus by force and make him their king. In man, there are 2 conflicting tendencies. On the one hand, as the saying goes, everybody needs somebody smaller than himself. We all need to feel by our side the presence of someone who is a little less intelligent, a little less educated, a little less rich, and even a little less handsome and a little shorter than ourselves. And every country needs another country a little less developed than itself. There our ego is satisfied, because there we have concrete proof that we have succeeded in raising ourselves a little higher than the others. On the other hand, at times we also need someone greater than ourselves. We need to have heroes. We are won over by laziness, and we think that it would be so much easier if we could abandon our responsibilities and take shelter behind someone great. This is what happens in the gospel. The crowds want to take possession of a miracle maker by making him their king. It would be so nice if he could free us from our responsibilities, especially by feeding us every day. But all that the crowds will have is a crucified king, whose power they will grasp only if they go through the cross and death with him and reach beyond to new life. How did this miracle happen? We cannot know the how of it because the gospel writers do not explain it to us. The miracle of the loaves and fishes is the only miracle reported by all four evangelists, but all the four are very quiet about the how of it. They only say that Jesus took the bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to his disciples. What the apostles distributed was bread that was broken. We have the habit of calling this miracle the multiplication of bread. But in the Gospels, we do not find the word multiplication, which risks making us look at Jesus as a magician who worked wonders for crowds enthusiastic for signs coming from heaven. It was not a multiplication, it was a division. It was the breaking of the bread. God gives bread to man who is hungry, but an integral part of that act is the offering made by man himself. The sharing of bread right in the middle of the desert, which is a place of no hope, is a powerful prophetic gesture. With Christ, we can win over situations that resemble an arid desert. Bring me your 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus says. Jesus knows our hunger for bread, but also our greater hunger for the things of the Spirit. Love, freedom, peace, joy, and so on. This is why the crowds were following Jesus for days on end, in spite of their hunger. Whatever efforts we make to satisfy the hunger and thirst of others will be a testimony to the world that the messianic times have already begun. Let us give what we can, and the Lord will make it increase 100 times over.